It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Hello, Quillers. Thanks for joining us on this 1-year anniversary episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. We're so glad that you stuck with us through a full year. And here we are in season 2 already of this magnificent series that asks you to continue to ask questions about the Shakespeare authorship question. Today, I have in studio with me your favorite producer of the show, our friend, Jake Lloyd.
You said I'm the favorite producer as if there's this wellspring of producers to choose from. I feel like it's kind of unfair. It's like picking a favorite kid.
Okay.
It's like a favorite kid, but you only have one kid, you know?
Well, I do have a favorite kid, but I have 3.
Right, we won't tell the other one.
But I won't tell you which one is my favorite. Look, so everyone in show business has an ego, apparently. And I'm sorry, Jake. I thought that everybody knew you were our favorite producer in the sense that you're one of our favorite people to have on the show.
It is one of my absolute favorite things to sit down and chat with you. It's a pleasure to be on this show and on this program. It's a pleasure to help create this program with you and to get it out into the masses because it's all still very, very fascinating to me.
Well, one of the most important things I think that our regular listeners and new listeners as well need to know is that this show would not exist if it weren't for you and the talents that you bring to making it all happen. I'm just the on-air talent. You're the guy who puts it all together and makes sure that every 2 weeks we have a new episode. And here we are, episode 27. Having completed an entire season.
1 year, yeah. I think the first episode came out on January 15th, I want to say, somewhere in that range. I want to say 15, for some reason that sticks in my mind. So yeah, it's a year ago. It's a year ago this week.
It's hard to believe that a year ago this week, we were doing a Shakespeare authorship question episode with special guest Brian Wildenthal, who helped us sort of determine and explain and demonstrate to our listening audience what was to come for the year ahead. And when you look at what we've accomplished in that year since that episode, I think we have fulfilled the mission that Brian and I first set out in that episode number 1.
Yeah, the 101, I believe, is what you called it.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a wellspring of information, and it's one of those things where I think that the amount of information is almost at times daunting, which makes any individual conversation so easily tangentable. Is that a word? That's a word now. So it's.
Shakespeare would loved it. He would loved it.
Yeah, and I feel like throughout the year, there have been so many very specific topics and very specific facets of the authorship question that you've been able to tackle with such incredible guests. That's something that I really love about this show, and I think over the past year, it's been really fun to listen to and experience along with you as the fly on the wall many times. And that is just sort of like, oh, here's another tiny little facet of something that you can do an entire hour-long podcast on. That's sort of how deep and how rich the question is, and that's something that I love so much about it, and one of the reasons why I love having the show on the network.
You know, I really appreciate your fly on the wall analogy because it really speaks to the aspect of you as an Oxfordian convert, in the sense that you didn't really have a dog in the fight or a stake in the game other than you're a professional who has a network, and that we are one of the many podcast series that we are a part of that network.
Right.
But here you were listening in to each new episode, oftentimes greeting guests in studio, making sure they're comfortable, setting them up for an episode, getting it recorded, doing all of the promotions, etc., for each episode. But over this year, would you say that you have become an Oxfordian?
I will say that I definitely lean Oxfordian. I still feel like I haven't, listen, you keep telling people on this show over and over again to read books, and I haven't read all of the necessary required reading yet. So I feel like I definitely lean Oxfordian because the information that's presented to me, analyzing said information with the best of my ability to have reason as a human being who exists on the planet, it makes the most sense to me, hands down. I definitely am a authorship doubter. That is something I can guarantee. Whatever the name for that is, I'm definitely I do not believe there's any world where the man that the works are currently attributed to wrote the works. I don't think it's. I just can't imagine a world where that's possible. It seems
somewhere
to me
in the
too
world,
fairytale.
John Shahan is cheering, because if you remember that particular episode when John Shahan was our guest.
Yeah, let's dive into that. That if I know that we should generally build, but I guess we're going to do it the opposite for this anniversary episode. That is my favorite episode of the show thus far that I am not on.
Really?
That episode to me is the and we again we've done the 101, which was a launching point. We even did the episode with me and my much better half Alexandra Hoy, where we were sort of the laymen's. It was sacked by the SAQ, I think was the name of that episode, where we
and that's one of my favorite episodes as a host, quite honestly.
And those are great because I think they are very good launching off points for this. But I feel like the reasonable doubt, the Shahan episode about the trust, and I'm immediately forgetting what it's called. The Shakespeare, what's the name of the thing?
The Shakespeare Birthplace Trust.
That's what it is. Birthplace Trust. I think that is a specific topic that when you look closely at it and when you can talk about it the way that Mr. Strahan does, which is quite simply stated. It's very, very easy to see the corruption, I guess, if that's what you want to call it. But just to see,
I'll go corruption. I'm okay with that term.
And that honestly, out of all of the reasons, I have. My closest friend is one of the other producers of this show, who is also an Oxfordian, Julie Bianchi. Her son, Paul, is my closest friend. And I have, because of him, known Julie for quite a while. And I have heard a lot about the authorship question for years. And everything has piqued my interest. And I've all thought, wow, that seems reasonable. That seems, this could, I could see why that would be true. But hearing the episode with Shahan and hearing about the declaration of reasonable doubt and the reasons that he gives to me is what pushed me. That is what made me go. And I signed the declaration of reasonable doubt. My name is on that digital document. And that to me is my favorite episode of the year, because I feel like that was the one that definitively made me go, oh, this is so obvious. Like, it's so painfully obvious that this is Disneyland. This is just Mickey Mouse and Disneyland.
Throughout the year, we have had guests who have been in studio with both of us. We've had guests who have called in from remote locations, sometimes as far as 3,000 or more miles away. Do you feel like it changed your opinion of the topic or the evidence to have the guest in studio as opposed to having the guest calling in from a remote location? Has that swayed you in a different way, one way or another?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a loaded question, because anytime you're there with somebody and they're looking at you, it's obviously easier to hear them. That's just, I think that's just sort of human nature. Not to say that you can't have really deep conversations with somebody on the telephone, but you know what that's like, that person. And a lot of times when a guest is here in studio, they tend to look at me as if I'm on the show with you at that moment. Like, they tend to include me in their glances, and like when they speak, they tend to turn and speak to me and turn their head.
They make eye contact with the room.
Right. Yeah. And so I definitely feel like the people who have come and sat with us are the people who I tend to definitely like, I guess, recall more of and connect with more of their specific specialty topics or whatever they sort of bring to the table. But yeah.
So are you saying having a speaker in the room who is an expert on this topic, sharing their expertise, makes a difference in whether or not you want to consider studying the topic?
Absolutely. And, I know that's maybe a shooting ourselves in our own foot for promoting an audio podcast. But I definitely feel like, man, if you are out there and you have a reasonable doubt or even an unreasonable doubt, then yeah, I definitely would suggest seeking out one of the many events that the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship puts out, and go and see speakers in person and talk to people who have an interest and a passion and details about this topic, because it is definitely, it's infectious. And again, I don't have a dog in this race, like you said earlier, and I still don't, to be perfectly honest with you. Like I am not. We did a whole episode a few months back talking about. We did a talk back where we took emails and we responded to people who have written us, and I talked about sort of like the real vitriol that comes from a lot of the people who are emotionally invested in this topic. And I definitely think that, man, if people, it's a symptom of modern times. Like, it's very easy to get into a Facebook argument with somebody, but honestly,
they get angry.
Like,
people do get angry. It's true. There's no doubt about it.
It's easier to get angry, I think. And also it's easier to just shut people up in your head, meaning like just stop hearing them when they're not in person. So this is one of those things that, man, I have definitely become a champion of this conversation, of the authorship question. And I really encourage people to talk about this with other people in person, because I think that's the best way for this information to sort of get out there, and for this to become part of the lexicon, where it's not just like, oh yeah, Shakespeare's that guy that we don't learn about in school, but also, hey, a lot of people think that that's not the guy. Like, that would be great if that was just how the conversation went, at least as a jumping off point. Obviously, it'd be great to, figure out who the real author was and give that person credit.
I'm so glad you said that, because what I was so pseudo hinting at is the idea that, the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship has a very widespread speakers bureau, and we have experts. In fact, many of the experts who have appeared on this program are available to be speakers for engagements in their communities and surrounding areas throughout the country. So if you're a listener and you have become a quiller and you're tapped into this topic and you would like to share it with other people in your community, in your service group, in your volunteer organization, then you need to contact us at the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship.org website and ask for a speaker to attend a library presentation, an organizational meeting, or whatever it is that you might be able to put together so that you can have one of our great experts, many of them published authors, who will come to your organization and share their expertise with whatever group you set up. So remember, go to ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, click on Speakers Bureau, and everything you need to know about booking a speaker is right there.
And let me ask you this question, and this might be a loaded question on my end, and that is, obviously, the Oxford Fellowship is primarily, established to establish Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, as the actual writer. But is everybody in the organization, are they all Oxfordians, or are some of them lean Oxfordian but are other things?
That's a great question, Jake, in the sense that as the organization continues to develop and advance, there has been an open embracing of any and all evidence that can come forward that might solve this greatest literary mystery of all time. And that's something the organization has always been dedicated to. We want to know the truth. We believe that Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, is the guy. But
right.
If someone were to be able to come forward with evidence that proved it was someone else, of course, we would welcome looking into that evidence. And there have been, as many people who are attached to this question know, there have been a myriad of theories. Some people on the Stratfordian side would say all those theories prove that it's just conspiracy theories.
Right.
But the rational mind says, if there are that many theories about somebody else wrote it, then P.S., somebody else wrote it.
Yeah. Also, I mean, it's an odds game. Like, I hope those people aren't playing horses, because like eventually, like at some point, if there are this many candidates, if there's a possibility that 20 different people are the writer, the odds that we got the right guy are not good because there's 20 potential people.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And
so
I think if you go back through the list of the 26 episodes that we have produced this last season, and you look at some of the experts that we have had as guests, I think that you get an overwhelming preponderance of evidence. And I think our first guest, Brian Wildenthal, who happens to be a lawyer, would be thrilled with that phrasing of that,
right.
As well as some of our other guests like Tom Renier, who is also a prominent lawyer member of the organization. And there is a preponderance of evidence that points towards Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford.
Right. Yeah, and the reason that I did ask that about people leaning potentially the direction is because I do, in suggesting people seek out these speakers and even hire and book these speakers for their own events, I want to encourage people who maybe again are doubters but don't immediately lean Oxford, because I do think the conversation is more important than sticking your flag in the ground, at least for me. And I think that's something that I've witnessed on this, is that it's some people are really just unwilling to hear if it's not their guy. It's just sort of like, no, it's not our guy, so I'm not interested. And so I do really love that the Oxford Fellowship sort of embraces, that, hey, we want to hear what you got to say. It's not just our guy or no guy.
From my standpoint as an Oxfordian, and obviously as a representative voice of the Oxfordian movement, every time someone proposes an alternate candidate, one of the things that I love to connect to is the fact that every one of the viable proposed alternate candidates are connected to Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, in some magnanimous way. Right. I mean, when people say, oh, it was Mary Sidney. Yeah, well, she's connected to Oxford in a gazillion ways. People say, oh, it was the Earl of Derby. Yeah, he's connected to Oxford in a myriad amount of ways. When people say that the collective, the collective authorship argument, which is
the multi-author, like in which it was written by, like, Shakespeare is a series of writers. Like there's that theory.
Right. It's a group. It's the Algonquin Club of the Elizabethan era. Yeah, and right. if you don't know that reference, I encourage people to Google Algonquin Club.
Right.
But yeah, it's this collective of writers, and we've talked about that through several episodes over the past year. And the interesting part about that is when you look at the names that have been proposed, Monday, Lily, Fletcher, guess who they're all connected to in one way or another? Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. So I think from an Oxfordian position, to be biased as an Oxfordian, one of the ways that strengthens our claim is by accepting all of these other prepositions, because they all tend to connect right back to the same guy.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Let me ask you this question, since this is sort of our anniversary year in review. Do you have a specific favorite episode? I know you mentioned the one with me and Alexandra. Let's put that one aside because because obviously, right? I mean, we're just fantastic. Do you have a specific topic or a specific favorite? And also, no, you know what? You can choose the ones with your wife. I was gonna say you can't choose the ones with Annie, but we can leave those on the table. Do you have a favorite episode?
Okay, thank you. No, if I could reach across the table and give you a kiss, I would, because obviously I'm obligated to say that my favorite episodes are the ones that include my wife, spouse, partner. But since you've eliminated those from the contention, I think when I think back about the episodes, I have to look at them in three different ways. I look at guests who were intriguing, who I enjoyed personally, and of course that's on a higher level for those who were in studio as opposed to remote. I look at episodes that were, I think, the most enlightening or informative to me, not necessarily maybe to listeners, because listeners come in at a different level of exposure to this topic than I do.
Right.
And then I also, because everybody knows, I'm a theater guy, I look at them from the entertainment aspect. And let's be truthful, a podcast series cannot survive if it isn't at least at some point, each episode after episode, entertaining in some way. Sure. And I hope we have fulfilled that.
Yeah. And that's my big, I've talked about that all the time. I'm like, hey, the message is the message, but also it should be enjoyable and fascinating to listen to. Because there's a million, you can go listen to people orate at you 100 different ways on the internet. But the thing that I love about this show is that I love the conversation. And I definitely think that, there are certain guests who I think just make the conversation so entertaining and so fascinating that definitely gives people an edge for sure.
So I have to qualify the answer in a variety of ways. Obviously, the episodes that included actors who have worked with me, including my wife, are going to be my favorite from the sense of that entertainment aspect and that different angle on the approach to this topic, right?
Right.
So when we eliminate those, then I think it comes down to the episodes that were most entertaining for me. And of course, when Ted Lang was in studio and we did the Love Boat to Cyprus episode.
Oh, so fun.
That's going to always stand out as one of my favorites. And Ted, in having interactions with him since then as well, is just such a magnificent guy, and can't wait to get him back on the program again.
I have to say,
interface with him again.
I have to say, Ted is hands down the most joyous of anybody who sat on this couch and or chair, wherever they were positioned, and spoke with you about it in studio. The joy and the passion that comes off of that man is absolutely contagious. I don't think anybody smiled as big throughout their episode as much as Ted did. Like that man is just so much fun, and he just radiates fun, and you can tell
he's
how much
also one of the most difficult guests to to do tech for, though, right? Because he moved always.
He's so animated.
He was like,
yeah.
I'm in the microphone. I'm way over here. I'm back at the microphone. No, I'm way
He's
over
so
here.
animated.
No, I'm back at the microphone.
That's that theater performer, man. You gotta be big. But it's like, yeah, I need you to be big right into that mic, though. Like real little. I need you to be really big, but real in a little space, in a little cube of space.
So, of course, that's one that's going to always stand out in my mind.
Sure.
Everybody knows. It has been no secret for years now that everybody knows that one of my favorite guests and one of my favorite scholars on this topic is Bonner Miller Cutting. And
I was just about to bring her up. You beat me to it. I was literally about to bring her up because
she has just such a wealth of information, and the topics that she chooses to focus on and her expertise on this issue with regards to one of the crucial aspects of it all is that document, The Will of Shakespeare.
So that is one of our earliest episodes. I believe it's episode 3, if I'm not mistaken. Episode
That's correct.
3. Bonner Miller Cutting, Professor Don Rubin, I think, right?
Yes,
is that his
correct.
name? And that's another one of those what I'm going to call tent pole episodes, where if for some reason you're listening to this anniversary special and it's one of your first episodes listening to the podcast, 1, thank you for joining us, but 2, tentpole episodes, The Will of Shakespeare is definitely one of them because it is such a definitive piece of information and of proof or evidence as you spoke of it. And her knowledge of it and her presentation of it are so entertaining. Again, listen, I've made no qualms about this. Like, I'm not a bright guy. I'm a total dum-dum, uneducated. I need you to speak to me in slow, simple language. Okay. And Bonner's explanation of the will makes it so easy to understand, and it makes it kind of meaty. It's real easy to get your teeth into as far as understanding, like, oh, this is a very problematic document.
Well, and she comes back like 17 episodes later and if you do the math on that, that's 36 weeks. That's, how many months
almost
later?
The end of the year. Yeah.
And delivers the episode Mischievous Minutia.
Yes.
And about her new book that she published, where one of my favorite aspects of this topic is when anyone can point and explain the fact that so many writers during the Elizabethan era suffered horrendous and terrible torture and punishment for the things that they wrote, except for this guy. And I think that's one of the unquestionable aspects. When you tie those two together, I think Bonner has nailed down a specific aspect of this subject that cannot be denied. There are others, of course, and
Sure.
One of my other favorite episodes is the one where we had Professor Roger Strittmatter on the air with us, and The Pain to Pen the Book, about his book, which correlates the early poetry of Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, with the later Shakespearean canon and connects that fabric together. And one of the things that I loved about that episode is something that I love about a lot of the episodes that we have done, where new discoveries are made in the episode. I'm looking at the cover of the book and going, wait a minute, this picture shows a guy writing from left to right, and it looks like he's writing in Hebrew. What's that about? And part of that episode
you mean
that's so
from right
fascinating.
From right to left, you mean?
Sorry,
right.
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
from right to left. Thank you. And that discovery and that discussion with Roger at that moment is so real and genuine, and it's such a huge part of what this mystery is about, in that you can be having a conversation with a fellow Oxfordian or even a Stratfordian or even a Baconian or a Marlovian, and suddenly discover new things in the moment And I think that those kind of spontaneous realizations are a big part of what binds the passion of the people who have connected to this topic over
Right.
over this last century. Literally, Brian Wildenthal will say, "Oh, wait a minute, it goes back 4 centuries," and
Sure, yes.
he's proven that in his book. But the ideal of Oxford has been 100 years this year.
Yeah.
In 2020. Wow. And I think that when you look at it from that perspective, you realize why so many people from so many areas of study, of knowledge, of life course of events have come to this topic and made it a source of their passion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that one's another one of my favorites.
I also really, really enjoy the episode in which, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Patricia Corelli.
Yes, of course.
Sat with you and talked about directing Shakespeare as a authorship doubter, and in your very specific instance, as an Oxfordian. I thought that was really interesting as somebody who myself is a director, albeit not of Shakespeare's work. But understanding what it is like to direct a material that you are in touch with on an emotional standpoint. And you are so in touch with this work on an emotional standpoint that I really, really thoroughly enjoyed hearing how much, how greater the impact was as an Oxfordian, how sadder the sad is under the understanding that 17th Earl of Oxford is the person who wrote it. That to me was really, really, really interesting to hear you talk about.
You know, a great future episode would be to have Patricia and my wife, Annie, do an episode, just the two of them, because they're both wives of directors who have spent their entire lives directing theater and with a focus on Shakespeare. Patricia's husband was the theater director at one of the most prominent Southern California high schools that still hosts on a regular basis every year a major Shakespeare high school competition and festival.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, it'd be great to have Patricia back again as a guest host again, because she did such a magnificent job. And it was fun for me being in the opposite chair, and just kind of answering questions. But those have been some fun episodes too, including the episode Let's Grill the Messenger. Remember when?
Yes. Yeah.
Remember when we had that episode where?
Yeah, but
I was on the spot.
That's sort of why. That's sort of I want to speak to that though, and I think that's what does make this podcast so interesting, is that honestly, I feel like it's very easy to sit down and interview somebody. It's very easy for you to sit down and just interview a Ted Lang, or to interview Michael De La Hoyde about the Italian research and that sort of stuff. But honestly, I feel like the nature of the show, it always ends up being a conversation, and I love. Honestly, I love having you as the host, because I do feel like it's not just I'm going to ask a question, I'm going to receive information. I feel like you have such a passion and such a knowledge yourself that you always tend to give our guests a little something to leave with as well. And that's something I've noticed as that proverbial fly on the wall that I mentioned earlier. Like it always ends up being a much more give, take, give than just, hey, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions and get your opinions.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Jake, and I'm humbled by the fact that you mentioned that, but I'm also really thrilled that you mentioned that, because one of the great pleasures I have had through this previous season is something that comes back to me regularly at the conference that we held in 2019 in Hartford, Connecticut, at Ashland last July, when we had our summer seminar, and now we'll be back in Ashland in 2020 for our annual conference. But when I come across fellow Oxfordians, some of the things that they share with me are some of those ideas that you talk about, where we are in the moment of an episode, and in the course of the conversation, this lightning bolt moment occurs where suddenly someone, me or the guest, goes, oh, what would be a great idea is A, B, or C. And that happens a lot. And it has happened a lot through the 26 episodes we have recorded. And it is something I am very, very proud of, that we have been able to inspire some of our guests through this program into new areas of research or new projects to consider or new avenues to explore. And right. I hope that that's the theme of this entire podcast as a whole.
I mean, it is. At the end of every episode, you tell everybody to keep asking questions. And even if you're a Bonner Miller Cutting and you are an expert in wills, it doesn't mean that you still can't ask a question. And I think that is something that you drive home. And I love that that's how you end every episode, because it is, in my opinion, the true message of Don't Quill the Messenger is indeed asking questions.
One of those scenarios includes one of the guests that we've had a couple of times, which is Hank Whittemore. And if you recall, in one of the episodes where Hank was our featured guest, we came upon this idea of writing a play that would include scenes that were from the Earl of Oxford's life,
right,
that overlaid into the Shakespearean canon.
Right.
And
I think I remember telling you that
that is something that Hank is working on.
I remember telling you that there's no reason that's not an HBO show right now, and that I want to direct it. I'll direct the.
Would you please
Oxford
pitch
stuff.
that to HBO?
Yeah.
I will gladly be a paid consultant on that show.
Also, I want to mention, I think that Hank Whittemore, first hat trick guest, first 3-time guest of the show, and now I'm number 2. I'm the second 3-time guest of the show. So it's me.
Wait, whoa! Are you sure? Come on, wait a minute. I'm going to look through this right now. Wait a minute.
Hank Whittemore was on a panel show. One of our the ones that were recorded at the Oakland conference, and then he did 2 here in studio.
Yes, that is.
And he was our first hat trick. Our first.
That's correct.
3 episode guest.
We have another hat trick coming though. Because
Annie, I would hope.
Well, are you requesting that my wife appear on another program?
All right. Another one of my favorite episodes is the Oxford's wife, or whatever we called it. Is Annie's first episode of the show.
I believe the title was Married Into This.
Yes, Married Into This. Honestly, that's one of my favorite episodes. Obviously, the two of you have great chemistry. I would hope, after you have such a successful relationship. But that is one of my favorite episodes. I think that hearing her journey, and I'm not gonna tell you how it ends, because I feel like it's a spoiler. If you haven't listened to the Married Into It episode, go back, listen to that one. It has a beautiful ending. That actually has like a 3-act structure. That episode, and it actually
we did receive a lot of comments about that episode, which I pointed out when she returned in the second episode that she was in, which is the Oxfordian Actors Bucket List episode.
Yes.
We alluded to that we received so many comments about her first appearance that we thought it was worthy of bringing her back again. But she won't be able to challenge Hank, who, you're right, has 3 episodes, and we have a future episode coming that will mark the 3rd appearance of Dr. Earl Showerman. So that will put Earl and Hank on a tied basis as
The triple tie. Me too. I'm up there too. Come on now. I know that this kind of doesn't count.
Oh yes,
I know that this kind of doesn't count, but I'm counting it. All right, I'm counting it. I'm very petty. I need this, Stephen. I need this.
Okay, that means that whatever of the three of you appear in a fourth episode, you will claim the prize.
The first turkey, if we're gonna stick to if we're gonna go bowling terms.
Oh,
wait,
I
no,
love it.
wait. Is a turkey
Yes.
4? I think a turkey's 4, right? I switched from hockey to bowling. I'm all over the place. This isn't a sports podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
Hat trick, turkey. You're all about sports that involve throwing something at something else.
I mean, isn't that every sport, arguably? Like in theory, think about it. You just described sports all in its entirety.
Oh yeah. P.S. That's sports.
So those are maybe some of our favorite moments in our tentpole episodes. But are you curious at all as to what were the listeners' most listened to episodes?
I'm so glad you asked that because I was curious to know what did the audience think? Because ultimately, in the end, what we think really doesn't matter.
Completely irrelevant, to be honest with you. This whole thing is just us talking about ourselves.
Okay, before we get into like the top 5 downloaded episodes or because that's subjective too, especially in the first season where you gain listeners throughout the year.
Of course.
So that'll be a qualifier. But before we get into that, one thing I really would like to know is, besides the 7 people who let me know regularly that they're listening, is anyone else tuning in?
All right,
I'm gonna
tell
numbers?
you. I will tell you. Well, we won't get into like fine details of numbers because that's not what this is about. But it's more just about. The reason I even asked this and I want to put this out there is because I just want people who maybe are listening to this who think that we're a bunch of loonies and that they're also probably a loony and that nobody else is on their team. That's the reason why I want to share these numbers, because I feel like there is a community, and I think that this is really fantastic. So for your first year, there were over 17,000 individual Don't Quill the Messenger downloads.
Well, wait a minute. There were 17 individual
17,000 individual
1,000
individual episodes. So that episode download. So, hey, you're not alone, Steve. By gone it, people like you.
Okay, but to be fair, if a really loyal listener downloaded all 26 episodes,
sure,
then that would like reduce the number of individual people.
Yeah, I said downloads, not people. I said individual downloads. Yes, but listen, we don't need to do math. All right.
I'm just trying to be humble. Just trying to be humble.
Sure,
that's all.
Sure. Be humble in your own time. But let's take a look at some episodes. I think this is actually really fun. I'm not gonna count the 101 because obviously the 101 is the most listened to episode. The first episode of any podcast is the most listened to because some people tune in and hey, it's just not for them, and so they don't listen to the next one. But they usually start at the first one, and so if people tune in and then don't continue on, so that's always going to be the number 1 episode. So the authorship 101. But so casting that aside, which I know is kind of unfair. Sorry, Brian. But casting that aside,
we won't blame Brian for the people who only listened to that episode and chose to never listen again.
No, not at all.
I'll take that on me. I'll say they're like, oh, we hate the host. He's terrible.
Or hey, I thought this. Hey, I'm a Baconian and I don't listen to anything other than Baconian stuff. Again, because that's out there. So who knows why? But again, we don't have to harp on that. We just talk about the good stuff, and the good stuff is, the top episodes, most downloaded episodes, a compounded historical blunder, is way up there, which is the aforementioned Julie Sandy's Bianchi, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm trying to remember who else is on that, and I feel really bad. I'm going to try to find it very quickly.
That was one of the original episodes first recorded.
Obviously. Yes,
for
Hank Whittemore.
This series.
That was Hank Whittemore number 1. Hank Whittemore, Robert Myers, Julie Sandy's Bianchi, discussing the historical implications of the misidentification of the true author
that's a
of Shakespeare
trifecta
canon.
when you think about it, because it's Hank, it's Bob, and it's Julie.
Yeah.
And I had very little to do with that whole episode. So that makes me feel wonderful. Thanks you so much for pointing that out, Jake.
A few of the 100 Reasons is another one of the top most listened to downloaded episodes, which is Hank Whittemore #2, I think, which is the one where he talks all about the 100 Reasons, his book 100 Reasons that.
You know what I loved about that episode the most was having his book in my lap while he was there in studio with us, and just flipping through pages and opening the book and going, reason number 37.
Right.
Answer this. And he was Johnny on the spot. And that was one of the reasons why I love that episode so much.
You know, one of my favorite parts of that
pages and go, this one.
You know what one of my favorite parts of that episode was? Leaning across the table and taking the book from you so that I can look something up because he says it and I think it's fascinating. And then going, oh man, I'm really into this. And then you going, hey, can I have the book back? And then me going, oh yeah, sorry, here you go. You're doing a show. I apologize. I forgot you're in the middle of something.
P.S. I'm doing a show here, Mr. Producer.
So another one of the pop that we talked about on the show, I think it's a tentpole episode. My favorite episode, The Declaration of Reasonable Doubt, is also one of the most popular, most downloaded episodes. When I say most popular, I feel like it's unfair. It's the most downloaded. Some people might just pick these at random. But you know, it's fun to celebrate.
Absolutely.
And then The Truth of a Documentary, with Cheryl Egan Donovan, talking all about her journey with her documentary, Nothing is Truer Than the Truth. Hopefully I'm saying
it's
that correctly.
Such a fascinating episode because not only do you get some insight into this issue, the Shakespeare authorship question, the Oxfordian premise, but also you get this wonderful insight into filmmaking and into what it requires to create a full-length documentary of the magnitude that Cheryl puts together, and with these magnificent names that she also has included in the film. And not only just Sir Derek Jacobi and Sir Mark Rylance, but Tina Packer and some of the other people that are involved in that documentary, and Cheryl's sharing of the insights into their involvement and coordinating all of that is a fascinating episode. You're right. And it doesn't surprise me that that's a highly downloaded episode.
And one of the other most popular episodes, most downloaded episodes, Sacked by the SAQ with Dragon Wagon Radio podcast, was me and Alexandra's episode where we first sat down and sort of kind of dug into you and figured out, we discussed as newcomers to this, what it all sounds like to us. And that was obviously such a great time. That was our longest episode ever because you can't shut the two of us up.
Well, okay. So let's figure 3 months into the series, we stack the deck by having two other podcast hosts as the guests who bring their own following and their own audience. And then who also, P.S., talk all the time and put the three of us on the air together, and it becomes the longest episode in the history of the program. Gee, and what a shocker. You know what?
And I one of the reasons why I really did love that one too was because bringing Alexandra into it was really fascinating because Alexandra loves Shakespeare. She is a literary major. She is a poet herself. And I know for sure, she won't admit it to me in person, but I know for sure that when this came to light, the show came to light, it was sort of a like, well, what are they saying about Shakespeare now? And then so to have her sort of bring her experience and talking about how her like college professor, specifically the one that she kind of recalls who had the most impact, was just sort of like, oh, we're not talking about that. Like, we're not, like, Shakespeare's from Stratford.
Shut it down.
Yeah. And it was interesting because, I didn't realize how academia has really just closed that door. The people that should be encouraging the asking of the questions and the research and the education are seemingly just slamming the door and being like, well, this is done. So that was sort of an eye-opening experience for me because I did not realize that was the case, and hearing her story about that was really fascinating. So yeah, we've had a ton of great episodes, and I look forward to year number 2.
Well, I think it's very important that our audience recognize what you just said there and what we determined and discussed in that episode, Sacked by the SAQ, where she did point that out. And something that Oxfordians have complained about righteously for many, many years, which is that the halls of academia should be the first and foremost location to want to investigate this issue.
Should be the front line.
To deny that the issue exists is just intellectual. What's the word I want to look for? Here I am, a wordsmith, and I can't.
Suicide? I was going to say suicide because it immediately seems like you're not an intellectual once you decide to,
It certainly damages your intellectual integrity to disavow that there's a question at all.
Yeah, it's also just not
and
very
once
scientific.
you've lost that credibility, I don't know how you regain it or maintain it, especially with the young questioning minds that we have in today's day and age. And I think that is something that's going to blow this topic wide open, is you have a whole new generation of people who are coming up through the system who are asking questions, who do take to heart the mantra of this program and say, wait a minute, I don't know that the authoritarian position that is being force-fed to me is something that I'm willing to accept blindly. And I have great faith in the new generation of scholars who are going to be exposed to this issue and what they're going to do with it. And
Right.
I think that one of the great aspects of this program is that podcasting obviously is a media that is widespread and appeals to a large demographic.
Right.
But it's also a fairly new form of information technology.
Sure, in the
And
grand
I
scheme of
think-
things, yeah.
And I think that ultimately, I hope my goal, and I know part of your goal is that it serves the purpose of introducing new minds to this topic and puts them in a place where they do say to that stodgy old literature professor who doesn't want to hear any question about anything and doesn't want to hear any adverse opinions to any of what he has been professing for the last 40 years of his
Right.
career. I think that in itself begs for question.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think the new generation is smart enough to know that.
Speaking of the new generation, you'll appreciate this, Steve. I over the holidays, I was visiting my brother's family, and I've got three young nieces who I love to no end. And the oldest is turning 16 and is following in my footsteps of being a total nerd in the best possible way, and loves reading and has recently gotten into Shakespeare. And I was wearing my Don't Quill the Messenger bust tee, available now at dragonwagonshop.com.
Wait a minute, you were wearing your what?
My Don't Quill the Messenger bust tee. That's what the tee is called, where it's the image, that classic image of Shakespeare, except the eyes have been torn away to reveal the eyes of the painting of or the Earl of Oxford below them.
One of my favorite images that you created for the
Why, thank
promotion
you.
of this series, by the way. And I
so-
own not only a bust tee, but also a coffee mug of
Ooh,
that
delightful.
same
So-
image.
So I was wearing that shirt, and my niece says, like, "That's Shakespeare," and I go, "Yes, it is." And I was like, well, "Do you know what this is? Like, what the point of this is?" And she, like, she's still not quite at the age where she listens to Uncle Jake's podcast network. Like, she's not quite there yet. But still, she's, I try to speak to her like an adult. I've always tried to speak to all of my nieces and every kid like an adult as much as possible, because that's just kind of how I work. But and you'll be proud to know that I said, like, yeah, this is the image that people assume is Shakespeare. And I was like, this Tarred back is the person that a lot of people believe is the true author, because the odds or the evidence against the man that people generally think wrote Shakespeare isn't actually the evidence. And it was just it was a little seed. I just planted a little seed for her, and I figured you would enjoy that. And I'm sure I'll be getting questions about that again, because she is the type of kid who never forgets anything anybody says. Those type of little geniuses.
Yes, I do.
Yes, I believe you have a couple. But anyways,
here's what I would encourage you and anyone who's listening that has young people in their life that they would like to share the concept of questioning with. And I believe that regardless of what you determine at the end of this question, the exercise in itself is so advantageous to any mind, let alone the growing mind.
Right.
But I would encourage people who have young people in their lives to purchase these books for young people. One is called A Question of Will. It was written by Lynn Kazitsky. It is available. It's a quick and easy read for any young person. It recommends middle reader ages 12 plus, but if you have an advanced child like I happen to have, you can introduce it to a younger mind. My daughter is 6 and she's all about it. A little further up the scale is the Blue Avenger series written by Norma Howe. And that, I would say, is definitely aimed at a middle school age range child. These are great books to introduce the Shakespeare authorship question to young minds in a way that they can wrap their heads around. And I guarantee you it will change their lives forever.
That's great. Yeah. Again, I have talked to you and the other members of the Oxford Fellowship about figuring out a way to get this information, to get the question, to get just the sheer question, because I don't think that people even know there is a question, just to getting it out there to a broader audience. And I think that the types of people who are the most passionate about this are the people who are already in the know, who tend to be on the older side, on the academic side. Generally one of those two. There's definitely a Venn diagram, and it's mostly shared in the middle. Figuring out a way to kind of spread this to the broader audience. It's been sort of a mission of mine in aiding you in this podcast venture since the very beginning.
That makes you a convert, brother. I don't care what you say. You're on board. You're a part of the mission. You're on.
Speaking of, you mentioned some of the visuals that I've made, including that bus design that I call it. I want to talk about another facet of this podcast that I don't even think a lot of people know exists, because again, we see the numbers, we see how many people are tuning in every week. I know a lot of people listen in their podcast apps, but I don't think people are either going to the website or following us on social media. Please follow at Don't Quill the Pod, at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media, on specifically Instagram and Twitter. If you're listening to this show, I really urge you to do that. It not only is it a great way to immediately be updated when you know there's a new show, and you can interact, you can comment, you can interact with us, the program, but also it's a great way to support the show, because having social media numbers is obviously very helpful from a business and producerial standpoint. That's not a word. You know what I'm trying to get at. But what I was, the whole reason for this was I make episode art for all of the episodes, and I feel like not a lot of people actually end up seeing them, but I just want to mention, because again, I'm very vain and I have to make everything about me as much as possible. Every now and then, the majority of them are just an image, just a still image.
Please look at my episode art. I worked very hard to create.
Well, here's an image. Sometimes they're just a still image of the books or a classic painting. Lots of classic paintings. Every now and then, I decide that something needs a little bit more, and I have to sculpt something. And I want to say that the Speaking Daggers episode art which was the episode that you and I did where we spoke about the conversation and about how it can become heated, is to this day still my favorite episode art. I really enjoyed making that specific graphic. I think it speaks to the biggest problem within the community and within the Shakespeare authorship question. And I absolutely love that episode art. And then my second favorite, of course, is if you haven't seen the episode art for the French Connection, exploring the influence France had on the work.
That's my favorite one.
It might be the stupidest of all of
it's corny and it's funny, but it's so clever.
It doesn't make any sense whatsoever,
I am certain
but it made me laugh.
The bard himself would have loved the multiple layers to that image.
Oh, very stupid. Sometimes I need just to have some stupid stuff. And you know what? I appreciate anybody who sees those and follows those. Please, once again, follow at Don't Quill the Pod on Instagram and Twitter. And listen, when those episodes go up, we post the episode art there. We post about the episode. Links are in all of the bios. And that's the best place for you to engage with the show. And, everything that goes there that's relevant, Steve sees, the Oxford Fellowship sees. So that is a really great way to support the show if you're enjoying this podcast.
And here's another thing that I would say to people too is, the theme of the show is keep asking questions. We begin every episode with the direction of let's go ask some questions. And I think on every episode we ask questions that at least for the minimal part should raise an eyebrow here or there. If you have any intellectual honesty whatsoever, they should raise your eyebrows. And at the end of every episode, we repeat, keep asking questions. And that means ask questions of us too. And one of the best episodes, as you pointed out, was when we did have that episode where we talked about some of the feedback the program has received.
Both
and
positive and
negative. We
Mm-hmm.
welcome all feedback. We have received some feedback recently that definitely is going to go into a future recap episode. And we'd love to hear more from all of our listeners. So please send us those emails. Tell us what you like. Tell us your favorite episode of 2019. Tell us about the episodes you would like to see for 2020.
If you're not on social media, and you do want to reach out, simply go to don'tquillthepodcast.com. Once again, don'tquillthepodcast.com, and just click contact, and you can fill out the form right there on the website, and it'll send us an email direct.
And we will, in fact, we will openly embrace and accept your hate mail and turn it into an episode. So please share all your criticisms, because that's food for fodder. Fodder for food? Wait. How does that? What's that term? I just
food for thought. Is that what you were trying to say? Food for thought.
Anyway, it's fodder for our cannon. No, it's
yeah, that sounds right. Cannon fodder. Okay. That's a thing.
Yes. We love
cannon
your cannon fodder.
Is just fodder for canning. You're like one of those weirdos who calls it standing up comedy. Like you really dissect the words.
I'm sorry, I had a Yoda moment.
All right. Well, speaking of Yoda, that's a terrible segue. But looking ahead, is there a dream guest or something that you are looking forward to in the?
I do have a dream guest. My dream
Who's your
guest.
Dream guest for, who's somebody or more than one for season 2?
Okay. P.S. If you are listening and you have the means to assist. I'm not saying I require you to make this happen. I'm saying I'm asking you to assist in making this happen. I think there are some potential guests out there that we need to tap into. First and foremost, Sir Derek Jacobi.
Yes.
I would love to speak with Mark Rylance about his Baconian position, because I believe that is where he leans. And I think that would make a magnificent episode for
I think that would be great.
I would love to speak to Rafe Fiennes, who is
Right.
also an Oxfordian. And beyond that, Keanu, if you're listening, Mr. Reeves,
You know, I
please
have to
join
say-
us
I
on
have
an
to say-
episode.
I have to say, Keanu Reeves this year in a what was just a promotion for another movie, dropped the bomb, so to speak, that he is an Oxfordian, and I think that is a very big deal. I don't think people realize. I don't know, so I just make broad assumptions about the people who are in this community. And I only assume that a lot of people go like, oh, yeah, that's the dumb guy from the dumb movies. But he has a massive star power and a massive reach. And talking about wanting to get a younger audience and a more widespread acceptance of the question, there is no better human on the planet than Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves is one of the most beloved people in the world right now.
Keanu Reeves... I think shame on you for attributing that bad rap to him because, amen, number one, multi-million-dollar motion picture star, two, has played alongside some of the greatest stars in the history of our lifetime.
I am not arguing that at all.
Three,
these are my standpoints.
Apparently, by all accounts, one of the most kind and giving and gracious, quote unquote, stars to work with, in the sense that he is not a diva by any means, is completely real and human. And four, he's also a musician. And people who know music and can read music and have musicianship are just a whole nother breed of person as well. Like their brains are wired better, I would argue.
That's fair. I'll take it.
And so yeah, if Mr. Reeves, if you're listening, Jake didn't mean it. You're a fine actor. We'd love to have you on the program.
I was playing the character in that moment of the stubborn old academic. That's what I was doing. Those are my opinions. All right, Stephen, don't try to. I don't care
about the stubborn old. The stubborn old academics are all going to die, Jake.
Fair enough. And Keanu Reeves will live forever.
And the rest of us will dictate how this conversation will continue. And I would argue that there is no greater time in the history of time, 100 years later, on the centennial of the advent of this position, there is no greater time to be an Oxfordian.
Well, once again, I just want to reiterate that it is an absolute pleasure, being a small part of this show and helping you, Stephen, as well as the rest of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship in bringing this show to the public. I am privileged to have you on Dragon Wagon Radio's podcast network, and I look forward to our continued collaboration in 2020 and all of those questions that we're going to ask.
Yes, so I think you're right, Jake. One of the best ideas for the continuation of this series moving into 2020 is to develop some of those wonderful lightning bolt moments that we have had from episode to episode with some of our guests. For instance, Professor Don Rubin needs to come back again and talk more from a theatrical perspective. Professor Roger Stripmatter needs to come back again and talk about the compendium that he's working on that's going to help educators share this message with new students. I think that the suggestions and ideas that we've come upon from episode to episode, where we've just in the middle of an episode said, oh, there's a topic we should study. There's a question we should answer. I think if we can move forward with some of those, we're going to have another great season of Don't Quill the Messenger and develop new quillers to follow this podcast series.
I look forward to it.
So do I. And I want to remind everybody that if you want to learn more, you can go to ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. It is your source and resource for all information you need on the Shakespeare authorship question. and Edward de Vere's 17th Earl of Oxford. In the meantime, read some books. You can find a magnificent number of books from all of our guests. As a matter of fact, many of them published authors, and many of them published authors of some of the best books on this topic that you can possibly get into your library.
And
in
I want
the
to
meantime,
say, I want to say further, really quickly, sorry to interrupt, is that if you haven't listened to every episode and you've cherry picked through the first year of the show, go back, listen to those episodes that you passed on, because there's tons of great little morsels in every single episode, and there's plenty of stuff there to sink your teeth into. Don't sleep on any episode, because again, the conversations are always fantastic, always insightful, and you'll always leave with something that you didn't have before you started.
Go back and remind us of the lightning bolt moments of what we said we were going to do, because 26 episodes later, we might not remember them all, for that matter. And send us your criticisms. We'll turn that into a future episode as well, because what is the theme? What do we ask? What do we want from all of you Quillers? Keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.
Hello. Let's see. If you could time travel to any period in time, when would it be and why? I always wanted to know, since I was growing up, who really wrote the plays of Shakespeare. So I want to be there at that moment when Shakespeare, because I don't think it was William Shakespeare. I'm an Edward de Vere, so the Earl of Oxford. So I'd like to be there, 1600s, Shakespeare writing Hamlet.